The cradle at the front of the great hall was empty, and every single person in Northridge had come to stare at it. Grace Miller stood beside that cradle with her hands folded, wearing a pale gray gown she had chosen herself because no one had offered to choose one for her. The hall was packed. Wolves from every corner of the northern lands filled the long benches, and their eyes never once went to the high windows or the fire or the food. Their eyes went to the wood of that cradle, carved 800 years ago, polished every year, and empty for the third year in a row. Behind her, a woman laughed softly. It was not a kind laugh. It was the kind of small sound that travels farther than a shout. 3 years, someone whispered near the second row. 3 years and nothing. The bond is broken, another whispered back. A king cannot hold a pack with a queen like that. Grace heard every word. Wolves always heard. That was the cruelty of it. The people who insulted her knew she could hear them, and they said it anyway, because they wanted her to. At the top of the hall, on a chair of black stone, sat Nathan Blake, Alpha King of Northridge. He was 31 years old and looked older. His hands rested on the arms of the chair and did not move. He had not looked at Grace since the doors opened. The old ceremony keeper struck the floor with his staff. "On the feast of the third moon," he called out, "the Alpha King presents his heir to the pack." The hall went silent. Nathan did not stand. The silence stretched until it became something physical, something pressing on the chest of every person in that room. Grace felt her face burning. She kept her chin level. She had learned that trick a long time ago, in a small village where her family had nothing, where a girl with no name and no bloodline learned early that the only thing she could control was whether she let them see her break. "There is no heir," Nathan said at last. His voice was flat. "The feast continues." The feast did not continue. Not really. People ate and drank and talked. But the talk was all one talk, and it went around that hall like water finding a crack. Grace slipped out through the side door before the second course. The corridor outside was cold and quiet. She pressed her back to the stone and let herself breathe, one hand on her stomach, the way she had done 1,000 times over 3 years. "Please," she thought. "Please, just one. Grace." She straightened at once. Claire Bennett came down the corridor with a cup in her hands and a look of pure sympathy on her lovely face. Claire had grown up in this castle. She had learned to ride with Nathan, learned to hunt with Nathan, and had been 3 days from being promised to him when a low-born girl from a border village turned out to be his fated mate. Claire had never once said a bitter word about it. Everyone admired her for that. "You left too early," Claire said gently. "Now they will say you were ashamed. They will say that anyway. Then let them." Claire held out the cup. "Here. You forgot it this morning. 2 years now. Every single day. It will work, Grace. These things take time." Grace took the cup. It was warm. It smelled of honey and something bitter underneath, the way it always did. "You are the only one who has been kind to me," Grace said. Claire smiled. "Drink it while it is warm." Grace drank it. She did not see the way Claire watched her throat move. She did not see the small, tight satisfaction that came and went in less than a heartbeat. She did not know that the herbs in that cup were not from the healing garden at all, that they came from a locked cabinet in the East Wing, and that they had been keeping a healthy woman from carrying a child for 2 full years. She only knew that it tasted bitter, and that she was grateful. Grace went to her rooms and waited for her husband, and Nathan did not come. He was in the council chamber instead, with a fire going low, and one man across the table from him. Lord Edward Blake was Nathan's uncle. He had raised Nathan after the old king died, taught him how to hold a border, how to read a treaty, how to keep 400 wolves fed through a winter. He wore a plain gray ring on his right hand, and he never raised his voice, and there was not a person in Northridge who did not trust him. "You saw the hall," Edward said quietly. "You felt it." "I felt it." "That is not anger, Nathan. Anger passes. That is fear. Fear does not pass. It spreads." Edward slid a folded paper across the table. "I did not want to bring you this tonight." Nathan opened it. It was a healer's report, signed and sealed by 3 physicians of the royal house. He read it once, then read it again, slower. The words at the bottom were very simple. The queen cannot bear children. Not this year, not any year. There is nothing to be done. Nathan set the paper down very carefully, as if it might break. There is more, Edward said. The old law is clear, and the old law is clear for a reason. The strength of a pack runs through the bond of its alpha. When that bond is barren, the strength thins. You have seen the reports from the southern farms. You have seen how many pups were born this spring who could not shift. You have seen the wheat. That is drought, Nathan said. Is it? Nathan did not answer. I love you like a son, Edward said, so I will say the hard thing that no one else will say. You can keep her and lose the kingdom, or you can save the kingdom and lose her. There is no third door. I have looked for it. There is not one. The fire popped. Nathan stared at the paper for a long time. She has done nothing wrong, he said. No, Edward agreed softly. She has not. That is what makes it a tragedy instead of a crime. Nathan went to Grace's rooms near midnight. She was still awake. She always was. She sat up when the door opened, and something in her chest lifted so fast it hurt, because he had not come to her rooms in 4 months, and here he was. Nathan. He stood in the doorway. He looked at her, really looked, for the first time in a long time. She had a book in her lap. There was a small dried flower pressed between the pages, from a walk they had taken in their first year, when he used to laugh at things. Are you well? He asked. I am well. She smiled. Come and sit. He came and sat on the edge of the bed. He did not take her hand. There was a report today, he said. There is always a report. This one was different. She waited. He did not ask her a single question. Not one. He did not ask what she drank in the mornings, or who gave it to her, or why 3 physicians who had never once examined her closely were suddenly so certain about the rest of her life. He had all the pieces sitting in front of him, and he did not pick up even one. Instead, he said, Sleep. It is late. And he left. Grace sat holding the book for a long time after the door closed. Something cold was moving through her, and she did not have a name for it yet. At dawn, the horn sounded. It was the summoning horn, the one that pulled every wolf in the castle and the town below into the great courtyard. Grace was woken by 2 guards at her door, not one, and they would not meet her eyes. The courtyard was white with fresh snow. Hundreds of people stood in a wide ring, packed shoulder to shoulder, breathing steam into the freezing air. On the steps stood Nathan, in full black, with Edward on his left and Claire on his right. Grace understood before she reached the bottom step. She understood by the way the crowd went quiet, by the way Claire's face was arranged so carefully into sorrow, by the way Nathan looked at a point just above her head. She walked out into the middle of the ring anyway. She did not stumble. She stopped, and she waited, and she looked at the man she had loved for 3 years. Grace Miller, Nathan said. His voice carried. He had been trained since childhood to make a voice carry. By the law of the northern packs, the Alpha King must give his people an heir. It has been 3 years. The healers have spoken, and there will be no heir. He stopped. The pause went on 1 beat too long. I release you as my mate. I release you from my house. You are no longer Queen of Northridge. Then he said the last part, the part that mattered, the ancient words that no wolf says lightly. I reject you. The bond broke. Grace had heard people describe it. Nobody who has not felt it can understand it. It is not like a rope cutting. It is like something living inside the chest, deciding, all at once, to stop. A wolf bond is not a promise. It is a physical thing, grown into the body over years, and when an alpha tears it away in front of witnesses, the one who is rejected feels every single thread of it come loose at the same time. Her knees hit the snow. The crowd made a sound, one low sound, hundreds of people at once. Grace knelt in the snow with her arms wrapped around herself, and she did not cry out. That was the thing people remembered afterwards. That was the thing they talked about for years in the taverns and the kitchens and the barracks. She did not scream, and she did not beg, and she did not ask him why. She got up. It took a long time. Nobody helped her. She got 1 foot under herself, then the other, and she stood there swaying in a thin nightdress, with her feet bare on the ice, and she looked up at Nathan Blake on his steps. Say something, Nathan said. It came out rougher than he meant it to. Grace looked at him. You did not ask me, she said. That was all. 3 words that he would carry for the rest of his life. She turned around. The crowd opened in front of her like water. She walked the whole length of that courtyard, barefoot, through snow that came over her ankles, past faces she had smiled at for 3 years, and not one hand reached out. The great gates opened. Behind her, on the high balcony, Claire Bennett watched the small figure go out into the white and disappear. She lifted her cup and finished the last of the honey tea herself, because there was no one left to give it to. Grace walked for 3 days. She did not remember much of it afterwards. She remembered the cold going from painful to strange to nothing at all, which she knew was bad. She remembered a river she crossed and could not name. She remembered stopping to be sick twice and thinking it was the broken bond, because a broken bond does that. On the 3rd night, she reached the edge of the Ashwood, the old forest where the crown sent no soldiers, because there was nothing there worth guarding. She got maybe 200 steps into the trees before her legs stopped working. She lay in the leaves and looked up at the branches and thought, quite calmly, that this was probably where it ended. She was still there when the lantern light found her. A woman came out of the dark with a lamp in one hand, an old woman with gray hair cut short and a heavy coat, and the hard, unbothered face of someone who had pulled a great many half-dead people out of these woods. Her name was Martha Kane, and 30 years ago, the crown had thrown her out too. "Well," Martha said, "you picked a cold night for it." She knelt. She put 2 fingers to Grace's throat, then a palm flat against her stomach, the old way, the way healers had checked for 100 generations. Martha went very still. She moved her hand, she checked again, she checked a 3rd time, and when she lifted her head, the lamplight showed a face that had gone completely white. "Girl," she said, "girl, look at me. Stay awake and look at me." Grace forced her eyes open. "You are carrying," Martha said. "Do you hear me? You are carrying, and it is not one." Grace's cracked lips moved. "What?" Martha's hand pressed flat again, and her voice came out shaking, which was not a thing that happened to Martha Kane. "There are 4. The birth nearly took her. It happened at the end of a hard winter, in a low stone house at the center of the Ashwood, with 6 women working through the night, and Martha Kane giving orders in a voice that never once rose. Wolves did not have 4 at a time. It was not something that happened. Martha had delivered close to 500 children in her life, and she had never seen it, and neither had her mother, and neither had anyone's mother going back further than anyone could count. By morning, there were 4 small bodies wrapped in cloth on the table by the fire, and Grace Miller was alive, barely, gray as ash and refusing to close her eyes until she had counted all 4 of them twice. "Boys," she whispered. "Girls?" 2 and 2, Martha said. "Now sleep, or I will make you sleep." Grace slept for 2 days. When she woke, the old priestess of the Ashwood was sitting beside her bed, a bent woman named Hattie, who had lived in these trees since before the current king's father was born. She had been holding one of the babies for 4 hours, and she had not put her down. "Do you know what happened to you?" Hattie asked. "I know what happened to me." "No, you know what he did. That is not the same as what happened." Hattie turned the baby gently so Grace could see her face. The child was the smallest of the 4, and her eyes, when they opened, were not brown or gold or green. They were a clear, pale silver. "When a bond is torn," Hattie said, "the power in it does not disappear. It has to go somewhere. He tore yours while you were carrying, and everything that should have run between the 2 of you for the rest of your life went into them instead, all of it, at once, split 4 ways." Grace stared at her. "He did not just throw you away," Hattie said quietly. "He made them. What they are going to be, he made. And one day, he is going to have to stand in a room and look at it." They named them on the 7th day. The eldest by 4 minutes was Leo. He was born with his fists closed, and he never really opened them. He was the biggest, the loudest, the one who ate first and slept last, and by his 2nd birthday he could knock a grown man off balance by running at his knees. The 2nd was Ivy. She was a quiet, watchful baby who cried at odd times for no reason anyone could see, and then, 3 or 4 days later, the reason would arrive. A storm, a fever, a visitor. Grace learned to pay attention when Ivy cried at nothing. The 3rd was Owen. He did not speak until he was almost 3, and everyone worried, until the day Grace was standing in the kitchen and heard her son say clearly, in her own head, that he wanted more bread. Owen had never needed to use his mouth. He had been talking to everyone in the house for a year and simply assumed they could all hear him. The fourth was Faith. She was small and pale and silver-eyed, and she almost never spoke at all, and for the first 4 years of her life, everyone treated her as the fragile one. They were wrong about that, but it took a while for anyone to find out. Leo shifted at 3 years old. Wolves shift at 13, 14, sometimes 15, never 3. Grace was hanging wash on a line when she heard a sound behind her and turned around, and there was a wolf pup the size of a large dog standing in her son's torn clothes, looking extremely pleased with himself. Martha sat down on the step and put her head in her hands. "We cannot hide this," she said. "Grace, we cannot hide 4 children like this in one forest forever." "Then we will not hide," Grace said. "We will just make sure that when they are found, we are strong enough that it does not matter." That was the day she stopped being a woman in exile and started being something else. The Ashwood was full of people the crown had thrown out. Wolves born too weak. Wolves born too strong, and therefore dangerous. Wolves who had spoken against a lord, or married the wrong person, or been on the wrong side of a border argument 40 years ago. There were 9 separate camps in that forest, and they hated each other almost as much as they hated Northridge, and they had been stealing each other's food for 2 generations. Grace walked into every one of them. She did not arrive with an army, because she did not have one. She arrived with a proposal, and then another, and then another. She settled a water dispute between 2 camps that had been going on for 11 years. She built a shared winter store. She sent Martha's healers to a camp that had turned Martha away twice. She took in 14 orphans in 1 year, and did not ask which camp they came from. She learned to fight, badly at first, then well. She learned to read a map and a supply line and a season. She learned that leadership is not the loudest voice in the room. It is being the person who has already thought about the problem 3 days before everybody else noticed it. By the time the children were 7, the 9 camps of the Ashwood answered as one. They had a shared council, shared borders, shared grain, and a fighting force of 600 that no one outside the forest had any idea existed. They called the woman who did it the Lady of Ashwood. Almost none of them had seen her face. She kept it that way on purpose. The children grew up wild and clever and far too powerful for their age. Leo fought everything. He fought boys twice his size and won, then fought them again the next week for practice. He had a temper like dry grass and a strange, fierce sense of fairness, and he would stand in front of a smaller child and take a beating rather than move. Ivy woke screaming 3 or 4 times a year. Always the same picture, in pieces. A hall of black stone, a fire that should not have been there. A man with a gray ring on his hand, standing where he should not be standing. She could never see his face. Owen got into more trouble than the other 3 combined, because Owen could put a thought into anyone's head and could not always resist doing it. He talked the guard dogs into unlocking a gate. He talked the cook into believing she had already made supper. When he was 6, he made an entire training yard of grown men forget what they were doing at exactly the same moment, and Grace had to sit him down and explain, very carefully, that there is a difference between what you can do and what you should do. And Faith did almost nothing at all, until the day she did. It was late summer. A visiting alpha from the eastern camps, a big man named Gilbert, who had never been fully happy about taking orders from a woman, lost his temper in the middle of a council meeting. He used the alpha voice on Grace. The alpha voice is not shouting. It is a command laid on the bones. When a strong wolf uses it, the body of a weaker wolf obeys, before the mind can even object. Grace felt her knees start to give. Faith, 7 years old, sitting on the floor in the corner with a wooden horse, looked up and said, "No." The command came apart in the air like smoke. Every wolf in that room felt it happen. Gilbert stood there with his mouth open. He tried again, harder, and it was like pushing a hand into water. There was nothing there to push against. Then Faith said, "Sit down," and Gilbert, who was 6'4" and had commanded 300 wolves for 20 years, sat down so fast the bench cracked. Martha found Grace outside afterwards, standing very still in the dark. "You know what that was?" Martha said. "I know. There is no defense against it. None. A king rules because his command cannot be refused. That child can refuse it." Martha let out a breath. If the crown ever learns she exists, they will not try to recruit her, Grace. They will try to end her. She is the one thing a throne cannot survive. Then the crown will not learn, Grace said. She was wrong about that too, but not for another 2 years. Northridge, meanwhile, was dying. It did not happen quickly, which is why it took people so long to admit it was happening at all. It started with the wheat in the southern farms, then the barley, then a summer with no rain, and then a summer with too much, and then a spring where the calves came out wrong. Then the pups stopped shifting. That was the year people started to be truly afraid. Out of 41 children who reached shifting age in the 3rd year after the banishment, 9 could not shift at all. The next year it was 15. The wolves of Northridge had been the strongest packs in the north for 800 years, and now there were teenagers in the capital who would live their whole lives as nothing but people. Claire Bennett was crowned queen 14 months after Grace walked out of the gates. It was a beautiful ceremony. She wore white and gold, and she cried at exactly the right moment, and the crowd, who badly wanted a reason to feel hopeful, cheered until their voices went. She did not have a child that year. She did not have one the next year either. By the 4th year, Claire Bennett was locked in her rooms for days at a time, with the door bolted, going through the same locked cabinet she had once taken herbs out of, looking now for something that would put a child in. There was nothing there. There never had been. The bitter truth she had spent her whole life hiding from herself was that she had been unable to carry since she was 19 years old, and the girl she had poisoned for 2 years had been perfectly, completely healthy the entire time. So Claire did what people do when the lie is bigger than they are. She made the lie bigger. She announced a pregnancy in the 5th year and lost it, publicly, tragically, at 4 months. She announced another in the 6th. She began to talk, in soft, careful sentences at dinner, about the curse the Barren queen had left behind on this house when she was cast out. She said it enough times that people repeated it. Within a year, it was simply a thing everyone in Northridge knew. The land was sick because a bitter woman had cursed it on her way out the gate. And Nathan Blake sat on his black stone chair and slowly came apart. Nobody understood it at first, because he did not drink, and he did not rage, and he did not stop working. He worked constantly. He rode the borders himself. He met every farmer who asked to see him. But a rejected true bond does not heal on either side. That is the thing the old law never mentions. It hollows out the one who is rejected, and it hollows out the one who does the rejecting, only slower, and from a different direction. He stopped sleeping properly in the 2nd year. In the 4th, he stopped going into the great courtyard entirely, and had a whole wing of the castle closed, because he could see the gates from those windows. Servants learned not to bring him gray cloth. He wore black, always, and he had not laughed once since the morning of the snow. Some nights he woke with a name already in his mouth, and lay in the dark refusing to say it, because saying it would mean it was still there. In the 7th year, on a wet afternoon in autumn, Edward Blake came into the council chamber with a stack of reports. "The northern border," he said. "The rogue camps in the Ashwood. They are not camps anymore." Nathan looked up. "They are organized. They have a council, a shared store, and a fighting force. Our scouts put it somewhere near 600. They have taken in 2 of our own border villages in the last year, at those villages' request. They have a leader. Our people cannot get a name, only a title. They call her the Lady of Ashwood. A woman. A woman." Nathan pulled the reports across the table. Trade figures, movement counts, a rough map with new marks all over it. It was, without any question, the work of somebody clever. At the bottom of the stack was a folded sketch. "One of our scouts got close to their main settlement," Edward said. "He could not get the leader. He got this. 4 children, all the same age, running in the training yard. He thought it was strange enough to be worth drawing." Nathan unfolded it. 4 figures. A rough charcoal drawing, done fast, done from a distance. But the boy at the front had been drawn in more detail than the others because he had turned to look straight at the person drawing him. Nathan knew that face. He had seen that jaw and that brow and that exact stubborn set of the shoulders every single morning of his life, in the polished glass above his own wash basin. The parchment slipped out of his fingers and drifted down onto the table, and Nathan Blake, Alpha King of Northridge, sat perfectly still and did not breathe for 11 seconds. "Nathan," Edward said, "what is it?" Nothing, Nathan said. It was the first lie he had ever told his uncle, and it came out easily, and later he would understand exactly what that meant. The Drought Council was called for the first day of winter, and every territory in the north was ordered to send delegates to Northridge Keep. The Ashwood had never been invited to anything in its life. Grace read the notice twice by candlelight in the long hall of the settlement, with her council around the table and the fire burning low, and then she set it down and said, "We are going." Half the table stood up at once. "They will arrest you at the gate," Gilbert said. "They will not. Grace, they threw you out in a nightdress in the snow. There is a law that says a rejected mate who returns to her alpha's land can be taken and held. That law is still on the books. I checked it myself last spring, and Edward Blake has never taken a single law off any book in his life." "That law applies to a rejected mate," Grace said. "It does not apply to the head of a neighboring territory arriving under a council summons. And that is what I am." The table went quiet. "They have called every territory in the north," she went on, "which means they have finally admitted, in writing, that the Ashwood is a territory. They did that, not me. And if we do not walk through that door now, while it is open, then in 10 years my children will still be living in a forest that the map does not name." She looked down the table. "They are going to find out about us anyway. Edward Blake has scouts in our trees. I would rather they find out on the day I choose, in a room I walked into on my own legs, than on a morning when 600 soldiers arrive at our gate." Leo, 11 years old, sitting at the far end where the children were supposed to be quiet, said, "Are we going too?" "Yes," Grace said. "All 4 of you." Martha put her face in her hands. They rode for 6 days and came into the capital in the middle of the afternoon. Grace had thought she was ready to see it again. She was not. The road came up over the last ridge, and there it was below her, the gray city on the hill, the towers, the black stone keep, the great courtyard she had walked out of barefoot, all of it exactly the same. But the fields around it were wrong. She saw that at once. She had grown up on land like this, and she knew what healthy soil looked like in early winter, and this was not it. The furrows were pale. The trees along the river had bare patches where there should have been none. They passed a farm where the fences had not been mended, and a man stood in the yard watching them go by with the blank face of somebody who had stopped expecting anything. "It is worse than the reports," Ivy said quietly, beside her. "Yes," Grace said. At the gate, the guards read the summons twice and looked at the cloaked woman on the gray horse and the 4 children behind her, and could not think of a single lawful reason to stop them. The great hall was full when they were announced. It was the same hall. The same long benches, the same high windows, the same fire. There were 19 delegations in that room, the heads of every territory in the north, and at the front, on the black stone chair, sat Nathan Blake, with Edward on his left hand and Queen Claire on his right. The ceremony keeper struck the floor. The delegation of the Ashwood. Every head in the room turned, because nobody knew who that was. Grace walked in. She was cloaked and hooded, in dark green, with 4 children behind her in a straight line, and she walked the length of that hall at an unhurried pace, with her hands loose at her sides. She stopped exactly where the law said a delegate stops, not a step closer. "You are welcome here," Nathan said. His voice was steady. "Show your face to this council." "Of course," she said. She put back her hood. There was a sound in that hall that people would try to describe for the rest of their lives, and nobody ever got it right. It was not a gasp. It was 19 delegations and 40 servants, and 200 guards, all inhaling at exactly the same moment, and then absolute silence, so complete that the fire sounded loud. Claire Bennett's cup hit the floor. Nathan Blake came up out of the black stone chair without knowing he had done it. He stood there with one hand on the arm of it, and his face had gone the color of old paper. Grace looked back at him and waited politely, as if she had all afternoon. She was 31 now. 7 winters in the Ashwood had put lines at the corners of her eyes and taken every soft thing out of her face and replaced it with something harder and better. She stood the way people stand when 400 wolves do what they say. "Grace," Nathan said. "Your Majesty," she answered. That was what did it, not anger. He could have survived anger. She said it the way a foreign head of state says it, with perfect courtesy and absolutely nothing behind it, and every person in that hall heard exactly what it meant. You are the Lady of Ashwood, Edward said. He had recovered faster than anyone. That is what they have been calling you. That is what they call me. I did not choose it. She turned back to the throne. I am here under the council summons. The Ashwood holds 9 settlements, 11,000 people, and the whole of the northern forest. We have grain. Northridge does not. That is the only reason I am in this room. 11,000, someone repeated from the second row. Grain, said someone else, much more loudly. And then Claire found her voice. This is a trick, she said, standing. This woman was cast out lawfully by the king in front of the entire kingdom. She has no standing to speak here. Guards, remove her from this hall. 2 guards started forward. That was a mistake, and it was not Grace who made them pay for it. One of them came within reach of Grace's shoulder, and Leo Miller stepped out from behind his mother. He was 11 years old. He was already taller than most men's chests, and built like something that had been made on purpose. He put himself between the guard and Grace, and he did not say a word, and the guard, 28 years old and armored, actually stopped. Move, boy, the guard said. Leo shifted. There was no build-up. There was no warning. 1 second there was a boy in a green coat, and the next there was a wolf standing in the middle of the great hall of Northridge, a wolf the size of a full-grown horse, black as the stone chair, with its head level with the guard's face. The guard went straight down onto both knees. He did not decide to. It was not a choice. In a room of wolves, when something with that much alpha weight in it appears at close range, the body kneels before the mind gets a vote, and by the time it was over, roughly half the great hall was on one knee, including 3 territory heads and a war captain who had fought in 9 campaigns. Nathan Blake did not kneel. He stood at his own throne and stared at the animal in his hall, and the animal turned its head and stared back at him, with eyes he had seen every morning in the glass. He is 11, Grace said into the silence. He shifted at 3. Leo shifted back, and stood there in his ruined coat, breathing hard, and stepped back into line behind his mother without being told. That is not possible, Edward said quietly. You should be careful with that word, Grace said. You have been wrong about it before. Claire was shaking. She could feel the room turning like a tide, and she could not stop it, so she reached for the only thing she had left. They are stolen, she said. She has been living in the wild with outcasts for 7 years. She has taken children from somewhere, and brought them here to shame this house. It is a trick, and I will not stand in this hall and be made a fool of by a woman who was thrown out of it. Be quiet, said Faith Miller. She was 7 years old. She had a wooden horse in her hand. She had not spoken since they entered the city. Claire Bennett's mouth kept moving, and no sound came out of it at all. The Queen of Northridge stood in front of 19 delegations, with her jaw working and her hands going to her throat, and nothing happened. And the horror on her face was the most honest thing she had shown anybody in years. Let her speak, Faith, Grace said. She was being unkind about Leo. I know. Let her speak. Faith shrugged and looked back down at her wooden horse, and Claire's voice came back with a rush of air that made her stagger. Nobody in that hall said anything for a long moment, because a good number of them had just worked out, all at the same time, what they had actually seen. Blood right, Nathan said. Edward turned sharply. Nathan, blood right, now, in front of this council. Nathan's voice had gone somewhere flat and far away. Bring the bowl and bring the priest. Your Majesty, this is not the place. There are 19 territories in this room, and whatever the answer is, it will be in every tavern in the north by tomorrow night. Yes, Nathan said, it will. The blood right is the oldest test the wolves have, and the only one that has never once been fooled. 3 drops from the child, 3 from the claimed parent, 1 silver bowl, 1 line from the priest. If there is no blood tie, the drops stay apart. If there is, they go together, and the bowl runs clear. They did it in front of everyone. 4 children, 1 at a time. Leo first, who put his hand out and did not flinch. Then Ivy, who watched the bowl instead of the knife. Then Owen, who could not stop himself asking the priest 3 questions about how it worked. Then Faith, who was so small the priest had to kneel. 4 times the bowl ran clear. By the 3rd one, the hall had stopped pretending to be a council meeting. People were on their feet. 2 of the territory heads had moved forward to see for themselves. Somewhere near the back, a woman was crying, and nobody knew who she was or why. Nathan Blake stood over that bowl with his sleeve pushed up and his own blood on his wrist, and looked at 4 children, who had his jaw and his brow and his mother's hands. "How old are they?" he said. "They will be 12 in the spring," Grace said. He did the arithmetic. Everyone in the room did the arithmetic. It took about 2 seconds, and it was the longest 2 seconds in the history of Northridge Keep. "You were carrying," he said. "Yes. When I stood on those steps, when I said the words, you were carrying 4 of my children, and you stood in the snow, and you did not tell me." Something in Grace's face moved for the first time since she had walked in. "I did not know," she said quietly. "I found out 3 days later, on the ground in the ashwood, from a stranger with a lamp." She let that sit. "But you are asking the wrong question, and you have been asking the wrong question for 7 years. The question is not why I did not tell you. The question is why you never once asked me anything at all." Nathan had no answer. He stood in his own hall in front of every lord in the north with no answer at all. 3 physicians signed a paper," he said finally. 3 physicians who never examined me." Grace looked past him, at Edward Blake, for one long, unhurried moment, and then back. "I have wondered about that for 7 years." Edward's face did not change by so much as a hair. "Stay," Nathan said. "No. Grace, stay. There are things that have to be said, and they cannot be said in this room." "Then they will not be said." And Nathan Blake, who had not made a mistake in a council chamber since he was 19 years old, made one. He used the alpha voice. "Stay." It came off him like a wall. Every wolf in that hall felt it. 2 delegates sat down hard. The guards along the walls went rigid. It was the full weight of the strongest alpha in the northern lands, laid on the bones of one woman, and there was not a wolf alive who could have refused it. Grace Miller did not even sway. She stood exactly as she had been standing, hands loose, chin level, and she looked at him with something that was almost, but not quite, pity. "You broke it yourself," she said. "In the snow, in front of them. There is nothing left in me for you to give an order to." She turned around. "We will trade grain with Northridge," she said to the hall, over her shoulder, in the ordinary voice of somebody finishing a piece of business. 300 sacks before the deep frost, at a fair price, because there are children in your southern villages who did nothing to me. My council will send terms. Good afternoon." She walked the length of that hall for the 2nd time in her life, while everyone watched. And this time, she was wearing boots. And this time, the doors were opened for her before she reached them. Behind her, on the steps of the black stone chair, the Alpha King of Northridge sat down slowly and put one hand over his eyes in front of 19 territories, and Edward Blake watched the 4 children go out of the door and did not blink once. The Ashwood delegation took rooms at an inn on the lower hill, because Grace would not sleep in that keep, and nobody argued with her about it. The innkeeper would not take her money. He was an old man with a limp, and he stood in his own doorway with his hands shaking and said he had been in the courtyard that morning 7 years ago, that he had stood in the 3rd row and watched and had not said anything, and that he had thought about it nearly every day since. Grace paid him anyway, but she took his hand first, and held it, and told him it was not his to carry. That night, Ivy woke up screaming. Grace was across the room before she was properly awake herself. Leo came in through the door with his shoulder first, ready to fight something. Owen was already sitting up with both hands pressed to his temples because when Ivy dreamed loudly, Owen felt all of it. Ivy was sitting straight up in the bed, eyes wide open, and she was not seeing the room. "Ivy! Ivy, look at me!" "The hall," Ivy said. "The black stone. There is a fire where the fire should not be. Breathe. There is a man standing behind the chair." Ivy's hands closed on her mother's arms hard enough to bruise. "He has a gray ring. Mother, I have seen him my whole life, and I have never seen his face, and I saw his face today. I saw him today. He was standing right there. He was standing beside the throne all afternoon." The room went very cold. "He is going to do it tomorrow," Ivy said. "He is going to kill the king tomorrow, and then he is going to stand in front of all of them and say that it was us." Nobody in that room slept again. They sat around a table in the inn with one candle and the shutters closed, and Grace laid it out the way she laid out everything, in order, slowly, until the shape of it appeared. "Edward Blake raised him," she said. "Edward Blake has run the treasury, the courts, the border, and the healer's house for 20 years. Edward Blake brought him the paper that said I was Barren. Edward Blake chose the 3 physicians who signed it. That does not make him a killer," Martha said. She had come with them, and she had not liked a single hour of the trip. "No," Grace agreed, "but it makes him the only man in Northridge who has never once been asked a question." "We need proof," Gilbert said. "You cannot walk into that keep and accuse the king's own uncle with nothing but a child's dream. They will hang us all." "Then we get proof," Owen said. Everyone looked at him. He was 11. He was sitting on the end of the bench with his knees pulled up, and he had the careful face he wore when he already knew he was about to be told no. "There was a man at the door of the council hall today," he said. "The one with the sores on his hands. He is a servant in the East Wing. He carries things for Lord Edward. I heard him thinking about it while we were standing there, because he was frightened, and frightened people think loudly." "Owen," Grace said, I know what you told me, what I can do, and what I should do." He looked up at her. "Mother, if I do nothing, and that man dies tomorrow, they will say it was Leo. They will say a boy who shifted in the great hall in front of 19 lords, went back that night and did it. And then they will come for all 4 of us, and then they will come for the Ashwood." Grace was quiet for a long time. "You will not force him," she said at last. "You will not push, and you will not take anything he does not offer. You will ask, and if he says no, we walk away and find another road." "Yes, Mother." They found the servant an hour before dawn, taking bread through the kitchen yard. His name was Peter Hale, and he was 51 years old, and he had worked in that keep since he was 9. He had a wife with bad lungs and 2 grandchildren in the lower town. He had spent 7 years carrying sealed jars from a locked cabinet in the East Wing to a room he was not allowed to enter, and burning papers he was not allowed to read, and not asking, and not asking, and not asking. Owen sat down on the wall beside him and did not go anywhere near his head. "You know who I am," he said. Peter Hale put down the bread. "I know who you are," he said. "Everyone in this city knows who you are by now. There is not a kitchen or a barracks in Northridge that talked about anything else last night. My sister thinks something bad is going to happen to the king today." The old man's hands started shaking. And then, in the gray light of a courtyard, Peter Hale put his face in his hands and told them everything, and nobody had to make him do it at all. He had been waiting 7 years for one person to ask. It came out in pieces, and the pieces made a picture. The jars from the locked cabinet in the East Wing had gone to Claire Bennett's rooms every week for 2 years before the banishment, and Peter had carried them. He did not know what was in them, but he knew the room they came from, and he knew that after Grace was thrown out, the deliveries stopped the same week. The 3 physicians who signed the Barren decree had been paid out of a private account, not the Crown Treasury. Peter had carried the letters to the bank himself. And the soil. That was the part that made Grace go still. For 9 years, sacks had been coming into Northridge from a mine on the eastern edge of the kingdom, marked as fertilizer for the royal farms, ordered by Edward Blake, distributed by Edward Blake, and spread by men who were paid by Edward Blake and who worked at night. Peter had helped load them for 6 seasons. The sacks smelled wrong. The men who handled them were made to wash before they went home, and every field that got them died within 3 years. It was not a drought. It had never been a drought. Somebody had been poisoning the ground of Northridge for 9 years, from a mine that the Crown did not know it owned. "Why?" Gilbert said. "In the name of everything, why would a man destroy his own kingdom?" Grace had the answer already. She had been turning it over since the word fertilizer. "Because a kingdom that is dying needs saving," she said, "and whoever saves it can have it." She stood up and walked to the shuttered window. "Think about the order of it. First, he makes sure there is no heir, not by chance, by design, for 2 years, through a woman he could steer. Then he makes the failure public and gets the queen removed, so there is still no heir. Then he crowns a woman he already knows cannot have one, and he waits. And while he waits, he poisons the land so slowly that nobody can see it happening. 9 years of failing crops and children who cannot shift, and one voice at the king's elbow, the whole time explaining that all of it is the fault of a barren queen, and a curse from the woods. She turned around. And then the king dies, with no heir and no successor, and a country on its knees, and there is exactly one man left standing, who has run the treasury, and the courts, and the border, for 20 years. Nobody would even call it a crime. They would call it a relief. And now, 4 heirs walked into his council hall, Martha said slowly. Yes. 9 years of work, and it ended yesterday afternoon at about 4 o'clock. Yes, Grace said, which is why he cannot wait another day. There was a silence. Then Leo said, so let him. They all turned. He was standing by the door with his arms folded, and his face was the face of a boy who had been thinking hard about something and had arrived at the end of it. Nobody in this room owes that man anything, he said. Not one of us. He put you in the snow. He put you in the snow with no shoes on, and everybody watched, and nobody helped. I have known that story since I was old enough to know anything. His voice cracked and he pushed through it. Let the man with the gray ring do what he is going to do, and then we take the Ashwood home, and we let them all sort it out among themselves. Leo, Grace said. Why is that wrong? Tell me why that is wrong. Because I have been trying since last night, and I cannot find it. It is wrong because of Peter's grandchildren, Ivy said. Leo turned on her. What? His grandchildren live in the lower town. Ivy nodded at the old servant, who was sitting very still with his hands around a cup. And the 400 people in the southern villages who cannot shift, and whoever is going to be standing in the great hall tomorrow when it happens. She met her brother's eyes without blinking. Nobody in this country did anything to us except about 6 people, and every single one of them lives in that keep. If we walk away, the 6 will be fine. It is everyone else who will not be. They watched, Leo said. The whole city watched. I know, Ivy said. The innkeeper watched. He has thought about it every day for 7 years, and last night he cried in a doorway and would not take money from her. Is that the man you want to leave to Edward Blake? Leo did not answer. And there is the other thing, said Faith. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall as usual, and she had not looked up. She was 7, and she said perhaps 20 words a day. What other thing? Leo said, more gently. Faith lifted her head, and her silver eyes went around the room, and she asked the question that ended the argument. If we let him die, she said, are we any better than the people who watched? Nobody said anything. Grace crossed the room and crouched down in front of her youngest, and put a hand on either side of her face, and did not trust her voice for a moment. Get your coats, she said. All of you. They came in through the kitchen gate an hour after sunrise, and Peter Hale walked them past 3 checkpoints, because nobody in that keep had ever once looked twice at Peter Hale. The great hall was already filling. The council was to sit at the 9th hour, all 19 territories again, and the servants were laying the long tables and building the fires. Grace stood in the shadow of the gallery above and watched Edward Blake walk in below her, in plain gray, unhurried, greeting people by name. She saw him stop by the great fireplace behind the black stone chair. She saw him talk to the firekeeper for perhaps 40 seconds, put a hand on the man's shoulder, and move on. There, Ivy breathed. That is the fire. That is the fire from my dream. Owen closed his eyes. The firekeeper is thinking about the wood, he said after a moment. He is thinking that the wood in the king's fireplace came from a different store this morning, and it smells wrong, and he was told to burn it anyway, and not to mention it, and he is thinking that he wants to go and stand near the door. What is in the wood? Gilbert said. Something that goes into the air, Martha said grimly. Something slow, that fills the space behind a chair for an hour, while a man sits still and everyone else moves about. I have seen it once. It looks exactly like a heart giving out. She pulled her coat straight, and nobody would ever question it. The man has not slept properly in 7 years, and the whole North knows it. Nathan Blake came into his hall at the 9th hour and sat down in the black stone chair, and the fire behind him was already burning. He got through 11 minutes of the opening business before the doors at the back of the hall opened. Grace walked in. The room turned. Again. And this time, Edward Blake, standing at the king's left hand with a folder of papers, went pale, for the first time in 20 years. This council has not called you, he said. No, Grace agreed. She was walking, and she did not stop walking. Your Majesty, get out of that chair. Nathan stared at her. Get out of that chair and walk 20 steps down this hall towards me. Right now. Do not ask me why in this room. Guards, Edward said. Do not touch her, Nathan said, and stood up and came down the steps. He got 8 paces before his knee went out from under him. He caught himself on the corner of a table. He looked at his own hand, as if he did not recognize it. Somebody shouted. Leo Miller came over the low rail of the gallery, dropped 12 feet onto the floor of the great hall, and got a shoulder under the King of Northridge, before he went down a second time, and half dragged, half carried him the length of that hall, and out through the open doors into the cold air of the yard, with his mother going ahead of him, shouting for the doors and the windows to be opened. Behind them, Martha Kane walked straight up to the royal fireplace, took the tongs, pulled 2 smoking lengths of wood out of the grate, and dropped them into a water bucket in front of the entire council. The hiss went up in a white cloud. She held up the blackened end of one of them and turned in a slow circle so that every territory head in that room got a good look. That is not oak, she said. The hall came apart. It took less than a minute for the shouting to start, and less than 5 for the doors to be sealed by order of 3 separate territory heads, who did not trust the Northridge Guard anymore. In the middle of it, Peter Hale was brought to the front of the room, and an old servant with sores on his hands stood in front of 19 lords of the North and repeated everything he had told a boy in a kitchen yard at dawn. And when he got to the part about the jars from the East Wing, Claire Bennett stood up. Nobody had asked her anything. That was the strange part. She stood up in the middle of a room that had forgotten she was there, and she said, in a voice that carried, it was wolfsbane. The hall went quiet. In the tea, every morning for 2 years, Claire's hands were perfectly steady, which was somehow worse. He gave me the jars and told me it was a mild thing, a delay, that it would give me time to make Nathan see sense. I knew what it was by the 2nd month. I kept giving it to her anyway. She looked around the room slowly at all those faces. She thanked me for it. Every day, she said I was the only person in this castle who had been kind to her. Somebody in the 2nd row said, sit down. She was never barren, Claire said. There was nothing wrong with her at all. There was never anything wrong with her. She laughed. One short sound with nothing in it. I am the one who cannot have children. I have not been able to since I was 19. Everything that has happened in this kingdom for 9 years happened because 2 people wanted something they could not have, and one of them was me. They let her out. She went without a word, and she did not look at anybody, and it was the last time most of the people in that hall ever saw her. Out in the cold yard, Nathan Blake sat on the stone steps with his back against a pillar, and color slowly coming back into his face, and listened to his own kingdom being explained to him by an old healer from the woods. He heard about the wolfsbane. He heard about the private account that paid the physicians. He heard about the mine on the eastern border, and 9 years of sacks spread on his farms at night by men who had to wash before they went home. He did not say anything for a long time. The fields, he said at last. The children who cannot shift. All of it was him. Most of it, Martha said. Not all. He looked up at her. The land is not only sick from the sacks, she said. There is a reason your grandfather's grandfather made the law about the Alpha Bond, and there is a reason. It is the one law nobody ever wrote down properly. A bonded pair holds the strength of a pack. When you tore that bond in front of witnesses on your own ground, in the middle of your own capital, you did something to this place, and no fertilizer in the world put those pale patches on the trees by the river. She shrugged. He poisoned your soil, boy. You did the rest yourself. Nathan turned his head and looked across the yard. Grace was standing 40 feet away with her back to him, talking quietly to 2 of the territory heads, and her 4 children were around her, and the sun had come out for the first time in 5 days. She was carrying, he said. When I said the words, she had 4 of my children inside her, and I put her out of that gate in the snow, in a nightdress, with no shoes, and I never asked her one single question. Martha did not soften it. That was not what she was for. Yes, she said, you did. The search of the East Wing started at noon. They found the locked cabinet, and the ledgers for the mine, and 11 years of letters in a hand, everybody recognized. It was, as one of the territory heads said later, less like uncovering a plot, and more like reading a very tidy man's diary. What they did not find was Edward Blake. He had walked out of the great hall in the first minute of the shouting, while every eye in the room was on a burning stick in a bucket of water. He had gone down through the east wing, taken a bag that had been packed and waiting for 9 years, and gone out through a side gate that only 4 people in the castle knew about. They did not realize he was gone until the second hour of the afternoon. They did not realize what else was gone until Grace turned around in that crowded yard, in the middle of a sentence, with the sun on her face, and counted her children. Leo, arguing with a guard captain about something. Owen, sitting on a wall. Ivy, watching the gate with a look on her face that was already wrong. And a wooden horse lying on the cobbles by the kitchen steps, on its side, where nobody had picked it up. Grace Miller did not scream, and she did not fall apart, and the people who were standing near her that afternoon said afterwards that it was one of the most frightening things they had ever seen. She put the wooden horse in her coat. She walked to the middle of the yard and started giving orders, and within 9 minutes, there were riders going out of 4 gates and a map on a table, an account of every road, path, and river crossing within 30 miles. Nathan came down the steps. "Take my riders," he said. "Take all of them. Take the border companies. Take the Eastern Road Patrol. Take anything in this kingdom that moves. Your riders do not know the ground he is running for," Grace said, without looking up from the map. "He is not going east to his mine. Everybody will think he is going east to his mine. He is going north. North is the Ashwood. North is your ground. Why would he run into your ground? Because it is the only place in the north where a woman with 600 wolves cannot ride in openly at speed, without 11 separate camps, stopping her to ask what is happening." She put her finger on a point on the map. "And because there is an old crown lodge here, in the trees, 12 miles inside our border, that has been empty since before I was born, and that nobody in this kingdom has thought about for 40 years, except the man who runs the treasury, and has seen every property list in Northridge every spring for 20 years. She rolled the map up. "He will use her," she said. "That is what he took her for. He cannot beat 600 wolves, and he cannot come back here, so he will send terms. He will offer a trade, and he will expect us to argue about it for 3 days, because that is what he would do." "And you will not argue," Nathan said. "No, Grace," he said it quietly. "Let me come." She looked at him properly for the first time in 2 days. "You are the Alpha King of Northridge," she said. "Not out there, not in your forest." He held her eyes. "Out there, I am a man whose daughter is in a lodge, with the person who did all of this, and I have never once been useful to you in my entire life. Let me come. Give me orders and I will follow them. If I say one word out of turn, you can send me home." She was quiet for a moment. "Get a horse," she said. They rode through the night and reached the edge of the Ashwood at gray light, and the terms came in exactly as she had said they would. A boy from a border village brought the letter. He had been given a coin and told to hand it to the woman in the green coat, and he was so frightened he could barely get it out of his pocket. The letter was short, and it was very reasonable. That was the thing about Edward Blake. Everything he had ever written was very reasonable. He wrote that the child was well and would remain well. He wrote that he wished no harm to any of them and never had. He wrote that he required safe passage to the Eastern Sea, a ship, and a written pardon signed by the king and sealed by 4 territory heads, and that the child would be released, unharmed, at the port when the ship was loaded. He wrote that he understood this would take some days to arrange, and that he was a patient man. He wrote that he hoped the boy who brought the letter would not be blamed. Grace read it twice and handed it to Nathan and said one word: "Now." They came at the lodge from 3 sides through the trees in the last dark, and there were 11 of them, not 600. Grace, Nathan, Martha, Gilbert, 4 Ashwood scouts who had grown up in those trees, and the 3 children, because Grace had tried to leave them behind and had discovered that there was not a force on this earth capable of it. Owen went first, on his belly through the frost, until he was close enough. 6 men, he said, 2 at the back door, 2 on the path, 2 inside, and him. He was pale. "She is in the upstairs room at the north end. She is not frightened, Mother. She is bored. She has been counting the boards on the floor for something to do, and she is up to 209. Grace let out a breath she had been holding for 18 hours. "Can you reach the 6? "Yes. Nothing that hurts them. Understand me. Nothing that hurts them. Owen closed his eyes, and 6 men in the freezing dark around that lodge all had exactly the same thought at exactly the same moment, which was that they had heard something moving in the trees behind them to the south, and that it was probably worth going to look. Gilbert and the scouts took all 6 of them without a sound. Grace went in through the front door of a crown lodge in her own forest, and Edward Blake was sitting by the fire with a cup of tea, fully dressed, as if he had been expecting company at that hour of the morning. "You are faster than I thought," he said. "You had my daughter for one night," Grace said. "You are lucky it was not faster." He glanced past her, at the man coming through the door behind her, and something crossed his face for half a second. Not fear, disappointment. "Nathan," he said. "Do not. I did raise you." "You did," Nathan said. "That is the part I am going to be carrying." There were footsteps on the stairs. Faith Miller came down them in a nightgown with her hair everywhere, holding the rail with one hand, and she stopped 3 steps from the bottom and looked at the room. "Mother," she said, "he gave me soup and it was not very good." Edward stood up. He was a man of 63 years, who had never in his life raised his voice or his hand, and he understood arithmetic better than anyone in the North, and he could see the arithmetic of that room perfectly clearly. He had 1 card left. He had watched a boy shift in a council hall, and he had watched a mother refuse a king's command, and he had made a note of both, and he had drawn a conclusion about the small, silent one that everybody always drew. He turned to the child on the stairs and used the alpha voice. "Come here." It was the full weight of it, 63 years of authority, from a bloodline that had held the North for 800 years, aimed at a 7-year-old girl from 6 feet away. Faith tilted her head. "No," she said. The command did not break. It was not pushed back. It simply stopped existing, the way a sound stops existing, and the silence afterwards was so complete that everyone in the room felt it in their teeth. Edward Blake tried again, and there was nothing there. It was like pushing at open air. He took a step towards her, and Nathan moved, and Grace put out a hand and stopped him, because Faith had come down the last 3 stairs. She walked across the floor and stood in front of the man who had taken her out of a courtyard by the hand, while everybody was looking at a bucket of water, and she looked up at him. "You made my mother stand in the snow," she said. "Faith," Grace said. "I know." And then Faith Miller did the thing that no one had ever seen, and that nobody in the northern lands has seen since. She reached up and put one small hand flat on Edward Blake's chest, and she took his wolf. There was no sound. Nobody was thrown across the room. There was only a long moment in which a tall gray man stood very still, with a child's hand on his coat, and something behind his eyes went out like a lamp in another room, and afterwards he was just a man. Martha Kane made a noise in the doorway and covered her mouth. Edward stepped back. He put a hand against the wall. He was breathing hard, and his face was the face of somebody who has gone deaf, and is only now working out what it is that he cannot hear. "It is gone," he said. "Yes," Faith said. "For a wolf there is no worse thing, not one, to live out your days inside a body that is only a body, with the other half of yourself simply absent, in a country where every single person around you can feel the sky change and run under it, and you cannot, is a thing the old songs do not even have a word for." "You will live a long time," Faith said. "Martha says you will be 63 for a long time. You are going to be a person now, and you are going to live in a small house near the sea, where they send people, and every day you will wake up, and it will still be gone." She turned around and walked back to her mother and put her arms around her waist and pressed her face into her coat, and she was 7 years old again, and she cried for about 10 minutes. Nobody in that room ever spoke about it afterwards, except once, and that was years later, and it was Nathan. They took Edward Blake back to Northridge in a cart, and he was tried by the Council of 19 territories over 11 days, and none of it was very dramatic. Mostly it was ledgers. He answered every question politely and did not deny a single thing, and when they asked him at the end whether he had anything to say, he said that he had done what he had done because the North needed a steady hand, and that everything else had simply been the cost, and that he had been at peace with the cost for a very long time. They sent him to the small houses near the Eastern Sea, where the North sends people it does not wish to see again, and he is there now. The land began to turn in the spring. Not all at once, and not because of anything anybody did. They dug out the poisoned fields and burned the topsoil and brought in clean earth from the ashwood by cart. 4,000 loads over 2 years, which is the least interesting and most important thing in this entire story. But there was the other part too, and Martha had been right about it. The bonded queen of Northridge came back onto Northridge ground of her own choosing, and stayed, and the wolves of that country felt something come back into the air over the course of about 6 months, so slowly that nobody could point to a day. In the third spring, 38 children reached shifting age, and 38 children shifted. The old ones stood at the edge of the training yard, and watched, and did not say anything at all. Nathan Blake offered her the crown at the end of that first summer. He did it publicly, which surprised everyone, and he did it in the great courtyard, which surprised them more, because that was the courtyard, and he had not set foot in it in 8 years. He came down off the steps, in front of the whole city, and then, in front of every lord of the north, every servant of his house, and the innkeeper from the lower hill, who had been given a place in the third row on purpose, the Alpha King of Northridge went down on both knees on the stones. An alpha kneels to nobody. That is not a custom. It is the whole architecture of what they are. I am not asking you to forgive me, he said. I have thought about it for a year, and I do not think it is a thing that can be asked for. I did not ask you one question. I had every piece of it in my hands, and I did not ask you one question, because asking would have made it harder, and I wanted it to be easy. His voice did not hold entirely level, and he did not try to fix it. I am asking for the chance to spend the rest of my life being worth more than that. If you say no, I will still spend it that way. It will just be further away from you. And Grace Miller stood in the courtyard where she had once knelt in the snow and looked down at him and said no. She said it kindly, and she said it out loud, so that nobody could invent a different version later. I will not take that crown, she said. It is not because of you. It is because of what it is. She turned so that she was speaking to the whole courtyard. 9 years ago, a law in this kingdom said that a woman could be thrown out of her home because of what her body did or did not do, and that she did not have to be asked, and that she did not have to be heard. Every single thing that has happened to this country since then came out of that one law, not out of one bad man. He only used what he found lying there. She let it sit. That law is finished. It goes off the books this month, and no queen after me will stand in a hall next to an empty cradle and wait to be measured. There was a sound in the courtyard then, and it started with the women. And I will not come back here as anybody's wife, she said. I built something in that forest. 11,000 people, 9 settlements, a council that works. I am not going to hand it to a steward and come down here and be a decoration in a nicer castle. She looked back down at the man on his knees. So here is what I will do instead. The Ashwood and Northridge will join as 2 equals under one council, and I will rule my half of it in my own name, and you will rule yours, and neither of us will ever be able to sign a thing without the other. That is my offer. Take it or do not. Nathan Blake started laughing. It was the first time anyone had heard him do it in 9 years, and half the courtyard flinched at the sound. Yes, he said. Yes. All right. Yes. He courted her for 4 years. He was not permitted to be good at it, and he was not. He arrived at the Ashwood on the wrong days. He brought a horse that Leo announced was a poor horse. He sat through council dinners where old Ashwood families who had been thrown out by his father's court looked at him steadily over the table and asked him direct questions, and he answered all of them, and he did not once send a soldier ahead to make a road easier for himself. The children decided about him one at a time, which was exactly how Grace wanted it, because she had made it very clear to everybody that this was not a decision one person got to make for 5. Owen went first, in the 2nd year. Owen forgave people the way water goes downhill, and also Nathan let him ask questions for 3 hours about how the treasury worked. Ivy took longer. Ivy watched him for 2 years, mostly, and then one night, when she woke from a dream with her hands shaking, it was Nathan who was sitting up in the hall, and Nathan who got her a blanket and sat on the floor with his back to the wall, and did not once ask her what she had seen. She decided about him that night and did not tell him for another year. Faith simply started following him around one afternoon in the 3rd year, without any announcement, and nobody ever found out why, including Faith. Leo was last, and Leo was hard. He was 15 by then and built like a door, and he had spent his whole childhood on a story about a woman with no shoes in the snow, and he was not interested in a nice man with a horse. For 3 years he barely spoke to him. What finally did it was not a grand moment. There was a bad flood in the western settlements in the 4th year, and Leo went out to it with the Ashwood companies. And on the 3rd night, he came back filthy and shaking with cold, to find that the Alpha King of Northridge had been in the water for 11 hours, in the next valley over, with a rope around his waist, and no guard within a mile, and had lost 2 fingernails, and was sitting on a wall, eating bread, with the work crews, and had not told anyone who he was. Leo sat down next to him on the wall. They did not talk about anything. They ate bread. That was it. And afterwards, Leo could never explain it any better than that. They married in the 9th spring after the return, on the border between the 2 territories, on ground that belonged to neither of them, which was Grace's idea, and which about 400 people complained about, and which happened anyway. There was no new bond. That is the part the songs always get wrong. A torn bond does not come back, not ever, and both of them knew it and said so out loud. What they built instead, they had to build by hand, day after day, for years, out of ordinary things. Showing up, telling the truth, asking the question. Grace said once that it was better that way, and that a bond is only a promise you did not have to keep making. The last thing worth telling happened on the feast of the 3rd moon, in the 11th year. It was held in the great hall of Northridge, the same hall, the same long benches, the same high windows, and the same fire, and the old ceremony keeper was dead, and his granddaughter had the staff now. She struck the floor. The hall went quiet. Up at the front, where the old wooden cradle had stood for 3 years, while a kingdom counted the months, there was no cradle at all. Grace had it taken out and burned in the 1st month, and the ash put on a field. There were 4 young people standing on that step instead. Leo, 22 years old and half a head taller than his father. Ivy, who had a seat on the joint council at 20, and had already made 2 lords very uncomfortable. Owen, who ran the treasury of both territories, and enjoyed it far more than was reasonable. And Faith, 18, quiet, silver-eyed, standing slightly apart the way she always did, and there was not a wolf in the northern lands who did not know exactly what she was, and exactly why nobody would ever try anything again. Grace Miller walked to the front of that hall, and stood where the cradle used to be. She was 43. There were gray threads in her hair, and she had not bothered to do anything about them. She looked out at a hall that had once watched her walk the whole length of it in bare feet, without a single hand reaching out, and she waited until it was completely silent. She did not make a speech. She had never liked them. "Eat," she said. "It is cold outside, and the food is hot." And the feast of the 3rd moon began, and for the first time in 800 years, nobody in that room was counting anything at all.